Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome back to another wrap up. Look at me doing my July wrap up on time for once in my life. I did pretty well in July. I read I think about 10 books, but I'm going to be talking about 11 because there's one book that I read most of it in July. I finished it the first couple of days of August, but I don't want to wait until the end of August to talk about it. So the first book I want to talk about that I completed in July is Shorefall by Robert Jackson Bennett. This book was one of my most anticipated books of the year. If you do not know, Side, which is the first book in this series, I read last year, and it was one of my favorite books of last year. I think it was in my top 3. It was fantastic. It's this Venetian inspired fantasy setting. It's all to do with animated objects. So these objects are what you'd call scribed, which is kind of in a sense like they've got runes on them, and then when objects are scribed they become animated and can do things. In the first book we follow a thief and she comes across an object that she steals that she shouldn't have and kind of goes on a journey from there. I was so disappointed by this, and I did a buddy read of this with my friend IshI from IshI Time. We buddy read the first book together as well, and we both loved book 1 and we were both extremely disappointed by this. I think the biggest issue for me with this book was I felt a huge disconnection between me and the characters, whereas when I read the first book I felt really connected to them and I wanted to know their story. But these characters, just especially the main character, felt like an entirely new character. There is a time gap, I think it's about a 3-year time gap between the end of book 1 and the beginning of book 2, but they still just felt so different. There's this whole thing with the main character where she can't touch people. I don't want to say why because I can't remember how early on in book 1 you find out about that, but that's a huge part of her character and it's a huge part of her identity and how she's isolated herself from everyone and she doesn't have anyone in her life and she relies on herself. Whereas in this book that's not mentioned at all, and she can now interact with people and have people touch her and whatever, but there's no explanation as to like how she went from one to the other. The other thing that I didn't like about this, which I feel so weird saying, is I thought this book overdid with the world building. I'm usually huge with world building, like that's usually my number one thing that I really look forward to reading in fantasy books, and it's the thing I really love. However, I found in this that it was just overwhelming. A lot of this book is focused on origins of the magic and how it all kind of worked, but there was just so much of that, and I just thought there needed to be more of a balance between the world building and the characters and also the plot. I don't know what to think about the plot. It was there, it was also lost in a lot of ways because of the world building. And then a personal pet peeve, I know this won't bother other people because I did see quite a few people say that they really enjoyed the ending of this book. I, however, did not. I really didn't like it, neither did IshI, but I'm finding that it's one of those books where there's like a new villain for each book in the series, and I just am not the greatest fan of that. So yeah, this was disappointing. I gave it 2.75 stars. I'm definitely going to read the next book, which I think is going to be the final book. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, this is on the list of one of my most disappointed books of 2020, unfortunately. Okay, but on a higher note, I want to talk about a book that I adored and I was not expecting to adore as much as I did, and that is Monday's Not Coming. This is a YA contemporary. I didn't think I was like a fan of YA contemporaries. I thought I'd kind of write them off, but I've read a couple recently. There are some real gems in that genre, and I found one in Monday's Not Coming. This book tells the story of Claudia. There's different ways to say it. I think she pronounced it Claudia. I listened to the audiobook. I should know this. What am I doing? But yeah, Claudia and her best friend Monday, they have this really close relationship to the point that they're basically sisters. Claudia is also an only child, so her relationship with Monday is that more significant. So the first timeline is present timeline. Something has happened to Monday. Claudia believes that Monday has gone missing and something has happened. The second timeline is focused on the significance of their relationship and what they mean to one another, and the two timelines do kind of end up matching up a bit and filling in the pieces of the entire story. A huge factor for me enjoying a book is unpredictability. Like I love books when they're unpredictable. Like for me, that's part of the ride, that's part of a journey of a book. So when a book tends to be predictable, my enjoyment tends to be negatively impacted. However, with this book that didn't happen, so I'm kind of a bit shocked. The most of the time you're reading this, you have a pretty good sense of what happened. You don't know exactly, but you have a good idea, and it was just such a well written book that I didn't mind knowing kind of the whole time. I felt so much for Claudia and I felt so frustrated for her because she was trying to voice her concerns and she just kept being ignored and silenced. The writing in this is impeccable. The character depth is impeccable. Like the characterization of Claudia and Monday, and like individually and also their friendship and the significance of their friendship was just incredible. I don't have any words. This book is incredible. I think despite the predictability of this book, which usually, like I said, would impact my enjoyment negatively, I found myself really captivated by the story, and it didn't take me long to finish this audiobook at all. It was just amazing. I was an emotional wreck by the end of it. I'm just amazed also by how this entire story was crafted, because I think it's a story that could have so easily have been poorly delivered because of the predictability, but because of the character depth of Monday and Claudia, and then also the depth of their relationship, this book was just amazing and a 5-star read for me. It's also by a black author. All the main characters pretty much I think are black, so if you're looking for more books by black authors to read, I highly recommend this one. It was just incredible. The audiobook is also fantastic and I can't wait to read more of this author's works because she is amazing. I have no words but amazing for this. The next book I completed was The Nowhere Child. This is a thriller mystery adult novel. This is by an Australian author. I need to try and start start reading more books by Australian authors because that is something I'm really lacking in my reading, unfortunately. This follows an adult girl who I think she's in her late 20s, early 30s, and she finds out that when she was a toddler, she was kidnapped. This story is about her going to America because her family is originally from America, so she was kidnapped in America and taken to Australia, and we follow her going to the US trying to uncover the mystery behind what happened with her kidnapping and like what her mum, the woman who raised her as her mum, did and why, because she doesn't understand it because her mum's dead, so she can't ask her. She's also going to meet her biological family. But then we also have a second timeline where we are following her biological family just after her disappearance and a little bit before her disappearance, and through that timeline we understand their circumstances and how it impacted them. I really struggled to get into this book. There was a lot of language used and a lot of actions by the characters that I was very uncomfortable with. A lot of ableist language, a lot of homophobic language, a lot of racist language, and that's my one main gripe with this book, is I just don't think it was necessary for the author to have these characters use that language or to do those sort of things that they did in order to make them unlikable characters. I think that is also kind of lazy writing. I think there's other ways that you can create a villain, so I really didn't like that. However, I loved the last fourth. I could not stop listening to the audiobook. I was so invested in the story, and like I was saying before about predictability, this book was so unpredictable. Like I just didn't expect it to go where it went, and I really enjoyed that at the time. So when I first finished it, I was kind of on that high of wow, that was a journey. Like I did not see that coming, and I gave it 4 stars. However, I think I'm gonna lower my rating. I did lower the rating to a 3.75, but it might be lower. I don't know. I just don't think that even though the story ended up being very captivating and it also ended up being a well-told thriller, like in the mystery elements, like I didn't predict the mystery, I didn't see it coming, and it was an addictive read, which I think is essential for thrillers. I don't think that excuses the choices that the author made at the beginning. This is her debut, so I really hope that she takes on this criticism. I think I'm gonna settle on a 3.25. I don't know. I did enjoy it, and I am looking forward to seeing what she writes next, and I want to read more Australian thrillers, so that's my goal for the rest of the year. I also read another YA contemporary. Like I said, I'm really starting to like YA contemporaries. I didn't think I was a YA contemporary person, but there are some gems, and this one was also a gem, and that is With the Fire on High. This was so good. This is a really popular book on BookTube, so you probably heard of it. It follows a teen mum, and it's about her juggling her life, school, being a mum, and also wanting to pursue a career in cooking. She wants to be a chef. I really enjoyed the main character. I don't think I've ever read a book about a teen mum, but I thought it was so well done. I thought she was so mature, but in a way that made a lot of sense. But then she also had a lot of things that still made her a teenager. It is a book that does touch on themes of race and class and stuff, but it's not a book that like deep dives into it, which I really liked because it was still there. Like those deeper discussion elements were still in the story, but they weren't a heavy focus. The focus was the main character in her journey into being who she wanted to be, and it was just really, really good. I think the one thing I will say is her love interest. I wasn't entirely sure on him. It's not that I disliked him. I just found him to also be a character with a lot of maturity, and he was also a teenager. I just didn't really understand how he was extremely mature, and I think I wish we got a little bit more from him, like a little just bit more of knowing him personally, because I just felt like I didn't. But other than that, this was incredible. I gave it 4.25 stars. I'm going to read more by Elizabeth Acevedo because this was my first book, and I've heard that her other books are even better. Like everyone seems to love Podex and Clap When You Land, which was her latest release, so definitely gonna give them a go. I loved so many things about this. I loved the food, I loved the main character's best friend and how supportive they were of one another. I also just really loved just reading about a teen mum and what she was going through with the judgment and juggling her life, themes of her not having her parents around. She is someone who's living with her grandmother and has been raised by her grandmother for quite some time. Her mother's dead and her dad's sort of out of the picture. He's alive, but he's sort of off in the world doing his own thing. They do still communicate, but she is in a lot of ways abandoned by him, and I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to see between them, and then also with her being a mum herself. So it was very good. I highly recommend it if you haven't picked it up already. There's a reason everyone keeps talking about it. I then started the first book in another adult fantasy series. I listened to the audiobook of The Furies of Cauldron by Jim Butcher, and this is the first book in the Codex Aleric series. All I knew about this series all I knew about this series going into it was that it's often compared to Pokemon, which was really spiked my interest. I can see why people compared it to Pokemon, but I think that put expectations on what I was thinking this book was going to be, and unfortunately they weren't met. The way the Pokemon element magic works is these characters have Furies, and they're based on elemental magic, so it could be like water, fire, earth, whatever, and then they use them. And the thing is, I was expecting that these Furies would have personalities and kind of be characters in themselves, and they weren't, and they're very vague. We don't get very much explanation. I think I'm just so used to reading fixed fantasy systems at the moment, and ones that have explained in a lot of detail, like down to the dot, about how everything works and how everything is made, whereas the magic system was just so vague. We don't get any explanation of how the Furies and the people like come into contact, because you do know that people in this world are not born with their Furies, but it's something that they get by a certain age, and I wanted to know more about that and the history, so I'm hoping that in the next books that is something we see. I just was expecting a lot more from the magic system, because the way this book had been sold to me multiple times was its magic system and its similarities to Pokemon, so that disappointed me there. In this book we follow 2 main characters. The first one we follow is Tavi, who is your farm boy. It's such a stereotype of a fantasy character, but what was cool about him was he doesn't have a Fury. So like I said before, by a certain age people are expected to have a Fury, and he doesn't, and so that's something he's dealing with. And the other main character we're following is a girl called Amara. She's been in training for a very long time to be part of the Majesty's Guard, but she is betrayed at the very beginning of this novel by her superior teacher person and is on the run. And then while she's on the run, she encounters Tabby. This whole book is basically like the good guys running away from the bad guys and then being chased. So it's just a chase book. That's how I interpreted the plot. The other thing I didn't like about this book, and a thing that really impacted my enjoyment, was the way the women were forced to feel desire or feel pleasure, and it's often done through the magic. There are multiple scenes in this. There's one scene where a slave is forced to put on this like collar that makes her want to pleasure her master. There's another scene where one of the main characters suddenly, she already had an attraction to this other character, but then she felt a desire to kiss him, and she did. That action was done through the guy's fury. His fury made her do that. There were a few instances where the women were doing things, pleasurable sexual things towards the men through magical persuasion. I'm trying to keep it vague because of spoilers, but it made me really uncomfortable. I know Jim Butcher's Judgment Files series is known for being extremely sexist, and I'm just like, I thought this was pretty bad. I don't know how bad his other series is, but it makes me worried. But yeah, I didn't love that. I ended up giving this a 2.75. It definitely did have elements that I liked and that I was intrigued in. Like, there was a lot of politics. I really liked the different cultures of the world, and I was interested in the magic, even though I did want a lot more from it. I did enjoy some of the characters. I really enjoyed Amara. I also really enjoyed Tabby's aunt and uncle. He is an orphan and he's been raised by his aunt and uncle, and I enjoyed both of those characters. So I'm looking forward to where the story's going, but I'm also a little bit apprehensive. But yeah, overall 2.75 star rating from me for this one. I also completed in July the second book in the Faithful and the Fallen series, and that is Valour by Gwynne. I really enjoyed this book. This was a step up from book one for me. I still really enjoyed book one. I think I gave it like 4 stars. This book is very traditional fantasy book, except kind of like a Viking version of Game of Thrones. That's kind of how I've been describing it. I really enjoyed this book because in the first book there's not really much magic at all. It's what I love what Gwynne has been doing is in the first book there's this very looming force over the world, and you get a sense that there is a big war coming and that the magic is returning to the world. And in this we start to see the return of the magic. We start to see the war and all the conflict unfold, and I really enjoyed all of that, particularly Cohen and Veritas. I think you pronounce her name as Cohen. I buddy read this with my friend Katy, although she finished it before me, but Katy says Cohen as Sven, but I say Cohen as Cohen, so I'll put the name on the screen because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But it's just funny because it sounds like the two of us are talking about two different people when we're talking about the same person. But I love—
Let's pause for a moment and appreciate the face I have when I say love.
Them, and I loved their dynamic, and I think that's what really made this book for me in particular. Was there was just some really fun dynamics that we got. I can't say too much obviously because it's the second book, but I definitely really like where this series is heading, and I thought it was a step up. I'm really enjoying it. I'll say, if you haven't read Malice, I highly recommend giving it a go if you are a fan of adult fantasy. I don't think it's going to be an all-time favorite of mine, but I do like a lot of the things that are happening in here, and I'm really enjoying my read of this. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. I also completed in July Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I listened to the audiobook of this, and I didn't realize until I started listening to this book that this is focused on racism in Britain, which I really enjoyed because I didn't know a lot of the stuff that was discussed in this book, because a lot of the things I do know about racism is American focused. So it was nice to read this, and I think it's really important to read racism from around the world. The author of this book talks about her experiences with racism. She is a black woman, and what she also does is she relates her experiences back to history, and I really liked that we were not only getting her experiences, so it was like in some sense part memoir, but we were also getting historical facts and events that are not talked about. There was a lot of things I didn't know, like apparently the UK, they have their Black History Month in October. One thing that she discussed quite heavily and gave a lot of examples of is how when the conversation of race comes up, that it is white people that snuffs out that conversation, and how it is a white person problem that, you know, white people need a fix, and to remove the system we got to do something. It talks about white victimhood, it talks about white feminism, it covers so much, and a lot of it, like I said, is in the context of the UK. If you're looking for a book that discusses race, I highly suggest picking this one up. I also think the audiobook is really good and accessible. The last bunch of books I'm just going to quickly mention because they're in vlogs, so I don't want to talk about them too much in depth. The first bunch of books are from my Reading Favorite Tropes book series, Reading Vlog Series 2, which is the second video in that series, and that is The Godfather, Moon and New Moon, and I also listened to the audiobook of Winter's Reach. These books all have the mafia family trope in them, which such a good trope. I'll never get over it. If you have any recommendations, please leave them down below because I do want to try and find more. I loved this. 5 stars, one of my favorite books of the year. This is my least favorite book of the year, and Winter's Reach was kind of a meh read for me, but if you want to hear my thoughts on any of these, please check out the mafia reading vlog. And then I also completed the last book in the first video of that series. So in the first video I did time travel, and the last book I completed was How to Lose the Time War, and I did really enjoy that. I gave it 4 stars. However, I recommend if you're going to pick that book up, don't listen to the audiobook, read it physically. I started with the audiobook and ended up having to switch to the ebook because I was lost. I was so lost. It's very lyrical, beautiful writing, so that's why I recommend you read physically. And that's it. Those are all the books I read. Let me know as well if you'd like me to talk in depth more in future wrap-ups about these books. I just don't feel like there's a point if I'm mentioning them in other videos, but then I know not everyone watches every single video, so I don't really know what to do. But I also don't want to make the people who do watch all my videos hear me repeat myself so many times. But yeah, let me know, and I really hope that you are well and that you are enjoying whatever you are currently reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye!